Actually, talking about the baseball coach, Mr. Brandon,
Yeah.
he gave me a copy of the 1958 championship basketball
Yeah,
game. I've got that.
I got one of them.
You got one of them?
Mhm.
It's kind of grainy, but
Well, you know, I haven't gotten out there, but they have a sort of a sports hall of fame.
Mhm.
yes,
And
they
a pretty
do.
nice little museum.
It is.
I just have never gotten out there to.
We'll visit over here whenever you go.
It's in the
Yeah.
state. Well, yeah, it's in the
Stadium over here.
stadium.
It's in the
yeah.
stadium.
You ought to see what.
People knew each
Her
other.
first name is
Made a
Lena.
personal acquaintances with each other in town.
Yes.
I
They
call her.
knew, and they knew your father, mother. They knew all about their families. And Lenoir City was, to me, it was a big town, coming from Bustletown. But my dad drove us on the school bus. Go to Greenbay. He swore he grew up in Pulltide, in Costa Mesa. And he said he'd never lived in that area. That's where he lived, where his children grew up in Bustletown. But that was, everybody knew everybody else. You feel me? And the boy wrote a story about Bustletown. Hey, I bet he interviewed you. Henry Moulter, he's got a little pamphlet, but it's an interesting story. He said that Bustletown was kind of a peninsula. And you know, it's really true. I never thought about it, but there's a big Tennessee and a little Tennessee on the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a true peninsula, of course, but I said, don't lose that image, because that'll be different to a lot of people when they see that.
Yeah, you ought to get that book.
Yeah, you
I'd
really.
like to have a copy of it too.
He couldn't afford to have many made.
Bustletown.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good book. You like
Beverly
it.
came in with one. She'd gotten one somewhere, but it's about the history of that little Bustletown community.
You know, there's an island over there. It's been passed on down.
There was some research done from a guy in New York back in the 20s on Bustle Island. It's like
Well,
Well, they did Christy, there was a little book in the library. It was the Smithsonian, I think it was the Smithsonian came down here, and they did an archaeological dig,
Yeah.
and they published a report. I think we've got a copy of that. I think I copied part of it. They excavated some Cherokee burial
yeah,
ground.
that's where I got it from you. Okay, let's go into interesting characters,
Oh, my
people, could be politicians. Any stories about that? I'll give you
Yeah,
some.
there are some.
Okay, you can start.
Yeah.
I can stay out of politics.
You can start it.
But I can't think of it right now, but I know when I thought that's so strange that Lenoir City would have this many strange people.
Well, of course, Charlie Edmonds, one of the most famous. And
Yeah.
you just Google him or go to the archives of the Knoxville News Sentinel, they'll tell you some of his escapades. I mean, he's the most colorful
Oh, yeah.
character
He probably was.
I can think of. There
I
was a
just can't
fellow.
think of it right now.
There was a fellow called Lamseye Bailey
Yeah.
that played the piano. I don't
Yeah,
know.
with no music. Lamb's Eye. I can tell you a story or two about Lamb's Eye. Lamb's Eye dug graves. He had an old pickup truck, and he had written on.
Clarence's life has touched almost everybody.
Oh yeah,
in Lenoir City.
he had written on the side of his truck, "If your heart don't tick, call click. Lamb's Eye come running with a pig." Well, Glenn called me one day. Glenn Click. Glenn had to pay him to get it off the truck, but and he could. I saw him playing the piano on a back of a truck, maybe at a festival or something.
I want you to
down
write that down.
But anyway,
Because that's the kind.
That is
that's
a
the
great
kind of
line.
thing that
That
is
we've
very
got a
good.
lot of funeral.
anyway,
memorabilia
Glenn
down
called me, and there was a guy by the name of, and I knew him, Egghead Russell, that lived at the Dixley Junction off of Watt Road. Well, his wife died, and they buried her up there at Union Cumberland Presbyterian. And Lamb's Eye was going to go dig the grave, but he wanted it deep because he wanted to be buried on top of his wife. And Glenn called me early one morning, and he said, "Do you have a ladder up at your place?" And of course, it was small up there then, up there next to Wooten American store. And I said, "Yeah," and said, "Lamb's Eye going to stop by and get it. He needs something to get out of the grave." And I said, "Sure." So, Lord, it was getting around close. It was in the summertime, and it was 7 or 8 o'clock. I'd closed, and Glenn called me and said, "Have you seen Lamb's Eye? Did he bring your ladder back?" I said, I don't know. Told him to leave it next to the building. I'd get it next morning. He said, "Lamb's Eye's not showed up." Said, he always comes down and gets his money. He don't wait till he fills the grave. Of course, Lamb's Eye had that grave about 8 feet deep. So I said, "I'll run up to Union, Glenn, and check on him." He said, "No, I'll pick you up." It wasn't 5 minutes, here he come, and we jumped in the truck. Of course, I lived up there still do, next to where the office was. And we took off up there, and his truck was sitting over here, and kind of getting dark, and they was the darndest pile of dirt you ever seen.
Heck, this could get out of the grave.
Well, it had about 8 feet deep, and I hollered, "Hey, Lamb's Eye, yeah, where you at?" "I'm down there in this grave."
And couldn't get out of it.
"Yeah," I said, you brought my ladder up here, where's it at?" He said, "I couldn't reach it." So I said, "Lamb's Eye, why didn't you
That's
just
like painting yourself in a
painting
corner.
yourself in the corner?" And I said, "Lamb's Eye, why didn't you just take that shovel and knock you a couple of places in there, and you could have stuck your foot in it, crawled." "Never thought of that," he said. I said, "Was you planning on staying here all night?" And he said, "Well, I was going to be here until somebody come and found me." But Lamb's Eye was a character.
Mhm.
I have a list of, I don't know who brought it by the office, but it was nicknames of folk
I've
through
got
the
it.
years. Have you got it? Of course, I got Frosty Propes in there. Some of them, they got a big character and under different headings,
Yeah,
like animals, birds,
yeah.
I
shaky
think I've
legs.
seen that.
I'll bring
I
it
never
up.
saw it.
Okay, I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I
They
got
had
one
a
of them shot.
double gut, and they had a big lamb's eye, and
They had Lamb's
had
Eye,
animals, and then they had parts.
Boar
and they had-
Schultz,
Yeah,
Boar Schultz.
yeah.
He run the smokehouse.
Right. Oh, you hadn't talked about the smokehouse.
No, we don't. We don't need to.
Was that the poo?
Ooh, room, yeah.
That's one of them. Wasn't the nicest place in the world.
No.
Well, Jess Buttram was sort of a character.
Jess
too.
Buttram,
He was chief of police.
Mm-hmm.
was he chief? I don't never remember him being. Now we had a small fellow
His
when he was in high
son is a
school.
policeman.
He was-
I mean, his
he was real
grandson,
short,
Mike
that
Tennant.
chief.
Shorty Wilkerson.
Shorty, everybody called him Mighty Mouse
Yeah.
and run. He'd jump out of the car.
Oh,
Now, was he a police chief or he's just a policeman?
I don't think I ever remember him
Oh,
being.
yes, he stopped somebody. He went across the road to get something out of his cruiser, and a truck hit him.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
on Broadway. down
He
on
was
Broadway.
killed on duty.
Right.
Yeah, he did. Well, he had a habit of if you were speeding, to step out in front of you. Now he was also the man that would go around, had a little guy that pushing a little wheelbarrow on a big bucket on a cart, and he was emptying the meters.
Mhm.
He done that once a week, I believe.
I can't remember this fellow's name, but he was mentally challenged. But he carried around a big alarm clock with him in his pocket. Patsy, we probably encountered him when we were taking up
We did.
tickets. And he'd say, "I've got the time," and he'd pull out this alarm clock and tell you what time it
Yeah.
was.
Who was
There
the,
was a couple of-
who was the preacher that was always at Dairy Queen? On Sunday nights, he would be there in particular.
Oh, I don't know that.
I never was.
Oh, he was
very
out
funny on
preaching to
Sunday.
the.
But no, he didn't really preach, but you know, he just kind of was friendly to everybody that came in.
Well, now there wasn't there a Wampler?
That's it.
Yeah, Bill.
Oh, Bill
Walker.
Wampler. You're
Yeah.
talking about Bill Wampler.
Yeah.
Always carried the word.
Paul,
Yeah.
I say you know all this.
Yeah,
I know.
Bill Wampler, you know,
I was very knowledgeable.
George C. could kind of handle Bill.
Yeah.
But Frank had a bad habit of saying, before we dismissed, has anybody got a word?
Uh-oh.
Well, Bill happened to be there about 45 minutes of it. He had a lot of words, but that was Bill. I picked him up many a time.
I heard, George C. was another character, but
Yes.
he's a minister, but.
When I had George in class, he's the
Yeah.
last person I thought that would become a minister.
Me
I
too.
think I told you
Yeah.
that one time.
You know, a quick story on George C. My mother developed
This is
Alzheimer's
better.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of times she didn't know me. And she called me by my initial CA.
Okay.
And I went out to the Baptist nursing home to see her one day, and I was out there 3 or 4 times a week. But this time, I never noticed George sitting on a couch with the back, and she was in a wheelchair. And I said, "Hey, Mom, how you doing?" And she looked at me kind of glassy-eyed, and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm your son, C.A." And she looked at me and said, "I don't have a child as ugly as you." George liked to jump the
I bet he
pig,
did.
or that thing. He said, "I'm going on the radio and I'm going to tell everybody the ugliest man in Lenoir City." So he would come down to the shop quite often and just chat, and he'd always throw his hat in first.
Mhm.
He said, "I'm here to see the ugliest man in Loudoun County."
We all used to go over to T's restaurant.
Oh,
Rome,
yeah.
And George came in one morning, and somebody said, "Here comes a preacher." Said, "Well,
That's shut up.
yeah, we'll have to buy his breakfast." So
Yeah.
he come on in, he said, somebody said, "Preacher, we passed a hat and gonna buy your breakfast." He said, "I'm glad to hear that." And he was pastor up at Shady Grove then.
Yeah.
He said, "I'm glad to hear that." Said, "Them people up there at Shady Grove are tighter than skin on bone." He said, "You can't."
Skin on bone.
I never heard of that.
He had some sense.
No, he did. He was a character, buddy.
Yeah, he held a revival
He
with that
was
church.
trouble sneaky in high school.
Was he
He
sneaky?
was.
He was kind of sneaky as
Yeah,
a
he was
preacher.
the big.
Well, he apologized to me. He said, "I'm sure forgive me for all the things."
Yeah, if he could pull one on you, you know, you're in
He
trouble.
liked to,
He lost his wife right after I lost my wife.
really, you
Yeah.
all had that in common then. That's a loss that can't be replaced.
No, it can't be replaced.
I couldn't tell you the stories, but they used to talk about those. The Blackburn man,
DR.
Oh, yeah.
ER,
I
that had a
say,
store downtown.
I say. Now, I know some true stories on that guy.
Well, see, now that was an old time true character.
Yeah, he was. Actually, at one time he shot a guy. That's before our time.
Yeah.
His son told me that story. Actually, his son, I was chairman of the board of Dixley Utility there for several years, and he was on the board right before I went in, before we turned it over to LCUB. But he liked trading cattle, and he got to talking to somebody waiting on a ferry across the river, and his son told this. They had a meat market there in Lenoir City, kind of where the barber shop is in J.W. Wyvern's.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a meat market, and he caught a ride over here with some fella and let him off, and his son said, "Well, Dad, did you get those cattle?" And he said, I say, I did. And he said, "Well, where they at?" He said, I say, I left them in the parking lot at the back. He went out there and said, "Dad, they're not here." I say, they're in the truck across the river. So he left them up, and he always said, my daddy, there was a monument company between Phelps Chevrolet and their car lot. You remember that? Dad worked there for a while before he opened his own business.
Right.
And Daddy was eating one day at the Triangle restaurant there, where
That little triangle building
that little
was
triangle.
a restaurant.
There was a restaurant there. I was a senior. It was there when you were
I
teaching.
remember it.
Yeah. And I can't remember the lady that ran it, but anyway, Daddy said he had ordered him something to eat, and ER come in and just got his plate and started eating what he had, and was talking. Dad said, "ER, you're eating my dinner." Well, I say, I am. Bring him whatever he wants. I'll pay for it. and his dad told him that there was a sale barn. I was acquainted with his son pretty much because he been on that board. But they took this cow.
Now, who was his son?
Which son? Richard and were grandsons, weren't they? Richard was his grandson.
Well, so that would be,
His son.
no,
might have
Richard's
it.
son.
He's
What was
dead now.
Richard's dad's name?
That's what we're trying to find out.
Oh,
Holler tonight.
Ralph.
Ralph
Ralph.
Blackburn.
Yeah.
Anyway, Ralph said that he and Dad took this cow to the market, and it was in Halls. They had one up there then, and he a pin hooker bought it. A pin hooker was somebody that would stay outside the barn and try to buy your cow or your cattle before you run them through the auction.
At a reduced price.
Well, whatever he could get them for.
Yeah.
I have sold a couple of, we used to run cattle,
Yeah.
and I thought it was a pretty good price, and I didn't have to wait on. So I have sold a few cattle at the Sweetwater Market to a pin hooker. But anyway, a pin hooker had purchased this cow, and they were running them through. The pin hooker was running them through the sale, and ER bought that cow back and give more money for it. And Ralph said, "Dad, you just sold that cow 30 minutes ago to the pin hooker." And he said, he looked at me and said, I say, it's a better cow. And I thought it was.
That was him, all right.
Yeah.
That was it.